Well, Finn wanted to sit in on the reading today, so he's been listening. You just didn't know he was. He was in the background. If you didn't hear him, he was. All right, so we got to chapter 14, I believe. And Marcus and Tata finally got the magistrate or the visitor of Festus's to listen to him. And Festus was creamed by a flying piece of rock off of Mount Vesuvius. So, here we are, chapter 14. It seemed the magistrates had listened to Festus's visitor from Rome. Within minutes, guards were rushing out of the forum, shouting out warnings. "Leave the city! Go directly to the gates!" they commanded. Tata looked at Marcus with relief. They had done their duty. And now, at last, they could leave Pompeii. But as they soon discovered, there would be no easy escape. Marcus and Tata joined the sea of people streaming down the main street toward the city gates. There were rich men and slaves, parents with babies in their arms, and children clutching their robes. Some dragged carts piled high with clothes and dishes and baskets. Others lugged sacks. As they passed the gladiator barracks, Marcus glanced inside the open gates. There was a man's body lying motionless in the grass, a pillar smashed across his back. With a jolt, Marcus realized it was the lanista. Tate saw him too. Not Tate, Tata. Tata saw him too, but Tata quickly looked away as he tightened his grip on Marcus's hand. Cyclops must be somewhere in the crowd, Marcus realized. But Marcus was no longer afraid of him. Everyone in Pompeii was fighting the same enemy now, the most heartless killer of all, Vesuvius. Marcus and Tata inched along with the crowd. The sounds from the volcano were getting louder, but most frightening was the darkening sky. An enormous dark cloud had swept down from the mountain. It stretched over the city, turning the day to light. The cloud was black and boiling, and it rumbled with thunder. And then the cloud tore open. Bits of rock fell from the sky. They were very small and light, almost like bits of ice. Tata caught some in his hand. "Hardened ash," Tata said. Ping, 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 they hit rooftops. Plop, 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 they splashed into fountains. They bounced off Marcus's head and shoulders and skittered across the street. But within minutes, the sprinkling of rocks had turned into a downpour. The rocks pounded down, hitting the stone streets and rooftops with an ear-splitting clatter. Bam! 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 The crowd erupted in panic, pushing and elbowing, shouting. Someone shoved Marcus and he almost stumbled. An old woman fell, but the crowd stampeded over her. The rocks seemed to be getting bigger, pounding harder and harder. Dust rose up, making it hard to see. Marcus clutched Tata's hand. He felt as though they were caught in a stampede of terrified animals. "Hold on tight," Tata shouted into Marcus's ear. "I want us out of this crowd." They pushed and squeezed their way through, dodging sharp elbows and scratching fingers. Finally, they burst their way out of the crush of screaming people. They hurried into a narrow alley. "Too dangerous," Tata said breathlessly. "Many people are going to be trampled." He pulled Marcus into a doorway. They pressed themselves against the wooden door, trying to escape the hail of rocks. But the downpour was even stronger now. Tata pointed to a small temple just ahead. "We can wait there until it stops." They pulled their tunics over their heads and waded through the river of stones. They were just steps from the building when whoosh! Marcus's heart stopped as he looked up. It was a huge fireball, bigger than the one that killed Festus. Kaboom! The explosion knocked Marcus back. The last thing he saw before he fell was a huge chunk of rock smacking Tata in the head. Marcus hit the ground hard, but within seconds he was back on his feet. He charged over to where Tata lay crumpled on a bed of stones. Marcus dropped it to his knees, grabbing Tata's hand. "Tata," he cried. But Tata just lay there, completely still. Chapter 15. Tata was breathing. Marcus could see that. But then, why hadn't he opened his eyes? Why didn't Tata answer when Marcus called his name? The rock seemed to have knocked him into a deep and terrible sleep, and Marcus could not wake him up. The storm of rocks continued. Flaming boulders whooshed through the sky, their explosions booming all around. Somehow Marcus managed to drag Tata through the rocks, with a strength he never knew he had. He hoisted Tata up the 5 stairs that led through the temple's open doorway. He laid Tata on the cold stone floor and collapsed next to him. Hours passed before Tata's eyes finally fluttered open, and even longer before the fog cleared from his eyes and he could sit up. With each passing minute, it seemed, the mountain's fury grew stronger. The booming and whooshing and thundering and pounding had melded together into a bone-rattling roar. The walls of the temple shook and groaned. They were running out of time, Marcus knew. And then suddenly, Tata turned to him. He took Marcus's hand. "My dear son, it is time for you to go," he said. "I know," Marcus said. "As soon as you're strong enough, we can know," Tata interrupted. "I'll never make it to the gates. But if you go now, you'll still have a chance." It took a moment for Marcus to understand what Tata was saying, that Marcus should escape by himself. "No," Marcus said, locking eyes with Tata. "Please, Marcus, I have thought about this. I have considered every idea. There is no other possibility." Marcus knew that this was right, but it didn't matter. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, "but I'm staying here with you." He looked away so Tata wouldn't see his tears. And that's when he finally took a good look at the statue that stood right in front of them. The god with wings on his hat and on his sandals. Marcus's whole body tingled. The god was Mercury. A strange but familiar voice whispered in his mind, "When hope is lost, follow the hand of Mercury." The words were so clear as though the old beggar woman were still right next to him. Marcus jumped up and went to the statue. He touched the marble, half expecting the statue to turn to flesh and blood, for Mercury to scoop him and Tata into his arms and fly them to the heavens. "What is it?" Tata said. He turned to Tata. "That old beggar woman, Tata," Marcus explained. "There was something else she said to me." He spoke her words slowly to Tata. Marcus waited for Tata to tell him it was crazy to believe in the ranting words of a stranger. But Tata didn't shake his head. He stared at the statue intently, studying it. And Marcus understood that at that moment it didn't matter whether the beggar woman's words were science or magic or madness. Marcus felt the truth of her words in his heart, and so it seemed did Tata. Tata rose to his feet, shaking off his pain and weakness. "Marcus," he said, his eyes wide with excitement, "look at the statue's right hand. What do you think it's going to be?" I don't know. I can't figure it out. Marcus saw it too. It seemed the statue was pointing to something. But what? The floor was bare. Unless... Marcus dropped to his knees. He felt around the tile floor until he found a gap between two large tiles. His heart pounded as he dug his fingers into the gap. There was a groove in the side of one of the tiles. He lifted it up, and he could barely believe what he saw underneath. There was a trap door. How did that lady know? Chapter 16. Oh, here's the statue. See how his finger is pointing down? And here's Marcus. There's a groove in between the floor. There's a trap door. Okay. Chapter 16. Benny, I need some room on here. You're taking up all the chairs, Ben. They lifted open the door and peered into the darkness. All they could see was a rickety wooden ladder leading down into the blackness. The smell of sulfur wafted up, stinging Marcus's eyes. It must lead to some kind of tunnel, Tata said. Where does the tunnel go? Marcus asked. There are tunnels under many Roman cities, Tata said. Most lead out of the city. People use them to escape in an enemy attack. But what if this tunnel didn't lead out of the city? Before he could ask, Tata was climbing down the ladder. He was quickly swallowed by the pitch darkness. Seconds later, his voice echoed up from below. Yes, Marcus, it's a tunnel. Come quickly. Marcus climbed onto the ladder and fumbled his way down, down, down. When he reached the bottom, Tata took his arm. This way, Tata said, turning him. Follow closely behind me. They moved blindly into a narrow passage, crawling on their hands and knees. It was hot as an oven, and the passage was so narrow that their shoulders brushed against the rough sides. The stink of sulfur made Marcus gag. Have you guys ever smelled sulfur? If you've ever been, some of you might have been to, I know in Arkansas, there are some hot springs, and they have a sulfur smell, and it smells like rotten eggs. I don't know if you can imagine when you're boiling eggs, you can smell that egg smell. Well, sulfur is a really strong smell like that. Sweat poured into his eyes and his heart hammered. The tunnel seemed endless, and the farther they went, the more terrified Marcus felt. What if the sulfur killed them? What if the tunnel collapsed? Marcus tried to fix his thoughts on his heroes, to gather strength from the stories that had always inspired him. He imagined he was Odysseus, braving the wild seas as he returned home from a decade of fighting. He thought of Hercules fighting the ferocious beasts, but those stories were of no help to him now. His muscles cramped, his legs and arms shook so violently that it was hard to move. A terrifying idea took hold of him, that this tunnel would never end, that he would be forever trapped in this evil darkness. They'd never make it out. But suddenly, his mind flashed to a new story, one that was still being written. And it was this story that gave Marcus the strength to keep moving. It was the story of a slave boy who saved his own father by hurling a live cobra through the air, who escaped from killer clouds, leaping flames, and fiery boulders that came hurtling from the sky. He was not favored by the gods or aided by powerful kings. It was the strange words of a mysterious beggar woman that guided him, a tattered mare who carried him, and his father, so wise and good and brave, who showed him the way through the darkness. It was this heroic boy who kept crawling through the tunnel as tears poured from his stinging eyes, who found the strength to help Tata kick open the door at the end of the tunnel. They clawed through piles of rocks to get to the surface, just outside the city gates of Pompeii. They staggered across a stone-covered field to the olive grove. The old white mare was waiting for them. Marcus put his face close to Peg's, looking into her gentle eye. Tata gently brushed away the rocks and ash that covered her coat. "You waited," Marcus said. Snort. Of course she hadn't left them. Marcus and Tata climbed onto Peg's back. Without so much as a tap, the mare took off toward Rome. She ran swiftly, her feet barely touching the ground. They were many miles away when the cloud of ash and gas above Vesuvius collapsed down to earth. The cloud ignited, turning into a flaming whirlwind that blasted down the mountain at speeds faster than any chariot. Within seconds, the city of Pompeii was burned and buried. But the horror of Pompeii was now behind Marcus, and all he felt of the mountain's fury was a whisper of heat on his back. He gripped Tata tightly, and together they looked ahead for the bright lights of Rome. Okay, so there is a back in time, so I'm going to read that at the end of the book. I don't know what this is. It's from the author of the book. So let's read that. I'm always sad to say goodbye to my characters when I finish writing one of my I Survived books. By the time I finally polish up my last draft, my characters seem real to me, dear friends, or even family. Marcus and Tata are especially close to my heart, maybe because I had to travel so far back in time to get to know them, almost 2,000 years. I kept reminding myself how very long ago it was that Pompeii was destroyed. It was before the United States was a country, before Christopher Columbus sailed the seas, before the time of the knights and the great castles of the Middle Ages. Pompeii is in Italy, but 2,000 years ago, the country of Italy didn't yet exist. Most of Europe and parts of Africa were all combined in one huge kingdom known as the Roman Empire. In many ways, life in ancient Roman times was brutal. Slavery was common. Those horrific gladiator shows attracted thousands of delighted fans. Rome's armies were always on the march, conquering new territories and dragging home new slaves. Without medicines and vaccines, most people died young. But in some ways, life in ancient Pompeii was surprisingly similar to our lives today. Like you and your friends, the kids of Pompeii, those who were not slaves, went to school, learned math, read stories and poems, and played sports. They loved their pet dogs, just as you obsess over your favorite football or basketball stars. Christian. Kids of Pompeii were wild about championship gladiators. There were even fast food restaurants. Pompeii's streets were lined with little stalls that served up soup and stews and bread to people on the go. I learned all of this during a recent visit to Pompeii. Most of the city has been uncovered and is now an enormous outdoor museum. My husband David and I walked through the streets, admired the fountains and statues and mosaics and the graffiti carved into the walls. I even stood in the grassy arena of Pompeii's amphitheater, where thousands of gladiators fought their brutal matches. It was like traveling back in time, and it was on that trip that I discovered my characters. And of course I met the most frightening character of all, the mountain Vesuvius. There it was, looming over Pompeii just as it did back in AD 79. Vesuvius is now silent and beautiful and green, though it is missing its top, which was blown to pieces in AD 79. But I wasn't fooled. Vesuvius remains one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world. During my visit, I was always nervously peeking up at that big green mountain, checking for wisps of smoke. I learned so much while I was writing this book, but as always, there is so much more I want to share with you. So I thought about the question that might be on your mind and tried to come up with clear answers. I hope what you've learned in my book will inspire you to do more research, to take your own trip back in time. I wish I could go with you. Goodbye for now. All right, so that was a really good book. Oh, there's more. Questions and answers. Okay, here we go. How many people died in the eruption of Vesuvius? There are no records of how many people lived in Pompeii and how many were killed, but experts estimate that as many as 20,000 people lived in Pompeii and in its surrounding towns. Of those, between 10,000 and 16,000 likely died. Many people did escape in the first hours after the eruption. Most of those who stayed behind were likely killed by the waves of gases and fire that swept down the mountain. Those pyroclastic surges traveled at 400 miles per hour and instantly burned everything in their paths. Wow, it's really fast moving. Next question. What happened to Pompeii after the eruption? The eruption lasted for 3 days and buried Pompeii under 30 feet of ash and stone. Now the ceilings in our classroom are about 10 feet tall. So 30 feet would be about 3 heights of our classroom. The city was under that much ash. Wow. Okay. Word of the disaster reached Rome, and the emperor sent a small team to investigate, but it's unlikely that they or anyone else got too close. For months afterward, the ground must have been very hot. Poisonous gases continued to seep from the earth. There were continuous earth tremors. In the early years after the eruption, people did try to tunnel into the ruins to find their belongings or to steal. But as the decades passed, the city was slowly forgotten. By the year AD 500, the great Roman Empire had crumbled. Means it fell apart. The Roman Empire was no longer. Cities were invaded by barbarians, and barbarians are fighters from the north and from Asia, north of the Roman Empire. These invaders stole whatever they could, and they destroyed the rest. Most written records of history were lost. Most Europe was plunged into a terrible time known as the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were named that because there wasn't a lot of advancement in civilization. There wasn't a lot of reading and writing being done there. There wasn't a lot of people experimenting and searching for answers to scientific reasons. So it was called the Dark Ages. There was little learning, art, or interest in science and history. People struggled to simply survive during a time of fear and superstition. How was Pompeii rediscovered? Many, many centuries passed. Remember how many years are in a century? Cent equals, what is it? Latin cent mean? 100. You got it. So hundreds and hundreds of years passed. The mountain healed from the eruption. The grass grew back and the trees grew back. People slowly returned to the areas around the mountain. Farmers once again planted olive groves and farms on the slopes. The Dark Ages ended. By the 1600s, new cities had been born all around Europe, and a few bold settlers had headed across the Atlantic Ocean to a strange land called America. Do you remember what year it was? The first year that one of the Europeans walked across what we now call Oklahoma. Do you remember what year that was? $1,500. What? What you guys think on that one? You might need to look that back up in your Oklahoma story, but do you remember who it was? What country it was? You got it. You got it, Mia. It was Spain. And who was it? What was his name? No, Umbria, I'm not going to let you tell. You Okay, you can tell his first name. Francisco. All right. You guys look up what his last name was if you don't remember. You need to know that. All right. Let's keep reading here. People in Europe were interested in learning and discovery again. Many became fascinated by the ancient Roman civilization that had vanished. Around Vesuvius, there were rumors of a beautiful city that once stretched out below the mountain. Every so often, a well digger or farmer would discover an intriguing artifact, the arm of a statue, a chunk of mosaic. But it wasn't until the year 1764, nearly 1,700 years after the eruption, when one of the greatest Pompeii discoveries was made, the ruins of a beautiful temple. More dazzling artifacts were soon found. The early diggers were more interested in snatching whatever treasure they could dig up. But by the 1800s, people realized that Pompeii's artifacts must be preserved and studied. Today, most of Pompeii's treasures are in museums. Excavations of the city have continued steadily ever since, though today at least 1/4 of the city is still buried. Why is Pompeii so important? There are other places where you can see ruins of buildings from ancient Roman times. The city of Rome is filled with them. But there is no place in the world like Pompeii, which was buried in AD 79 and sealed for centuries, like a time capsule. The ash and stone preserved more than just the buildings. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of artifacts, skeletons, petrified loaves of bread, statues, toys, furniture, chariots, gladiator helmets, silverware, cooking pots, shoes, earrings, and much, much more. Most of what we know about life in ancient Rome comes from the discoveries made in Pompeii and a neighboring town called Herculaneum, which was also buried by Vesuvius in AD 79. If you guys don't even make it to Italy, to Rome, there's museums in Rome. There's also museum there. You can visit Pompeii itself, but also in the museum there in London, in the British Museum, they even have artifacts from Pompeii. There are many cities. I think even the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. So it's a very historic event, and so there's so many things that we can learn from it. A lot of museums have had access to some of these artifacts. So if you're ever going through a museum in a major city like that, you might keep your eye out for some ruins from Pompeii. It'd be kind of cool. Will Vesuvius erupt again? Yes. Yes, it will. Vesuvius is one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes and also one of the most closely monitored. It has erupted many times over the past few centuries. None of these eruptions were nearly as powerful as the one that buried Pompeii, but experts have no doubt that another enormous eruption can happen soon. And this disaster could be devastating. Today, an estimated 2 million people live in the dangerous red zone around Vesuvius. Now remember, they said they thought maybe around 20,000 people. Now they say 2 million. That's how many extra zeros on the end of that? 20,000 has 4 zeros. How many zeros does 2 million have? 6 zeros, 2 more zeros. So 100 times bigger, yeah. Just 15 miles north is the crowded city of Naples, where nearly 1 million people live. Hopefully the mountain would give plenty of warning before a major eruption and people would have time to evacuate. But today, nearly 2,000 years after Pompeii was destroyed, we remain powerless against the destructive fury of a major volcanic eruption. Much of this beautiful region of Italy would likely be buried again. And about that date, AD 79. You guys already know all this. You might wonder what those letters AD stand for. What do we know they don't stand for? After death. They do not stand for that. It's Latin. AD is Latin, 2 Latin words. Today, most of the world uses a calendar that divides history into 2 big time periods. The time before Jesus Christ was born and the time after. The time before year 0 is known as BC, which stands for, good job, Elliot, before Christ. This time, the time after is known as AD. Many people believe that stands for after death because that would make sense, but AD is actually an abbreviation for the Latin words, good job, Sarah, Anno Domini, which mean in the year of our Lord, indicating the time after Jesus was born. So the time before he was born, the time after he was born. These terms came into use as Christianity spread across many parts of the world. Nowadays, you might see the terms BCE and CE used instead, which BCE we learn means, Zane got it, before Common Era. And what does CE mean? Good job, Irish. Common Era. Okay, so our Common Era and then before our Common Era. And the reason for that is, why are there 2 designations? Right, because the majority of people that live in the world are not Christian. So they came up with a method that would work for everybody, whether you were a Christian or you were not Christian. So, Common Era, before Common Era, before Christ, Anno Domini. Okay? Great. Let's see here. I guess that's it. If you want to read more about Pompeii, a lot of you said you really were interested in it. She has some books here that you might want to take a look at. One of them is called Ashen Sky, The Letters of Pliny the Younger on the Eruption of Vesuvius by Pliny. And he was a 17-year-old boy, and he witnessed the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Now, you guys, I've asked you to take and do journal entries, do video recordings of yourself every day, maybe about what you did that day, how your day might be different. My family, my husband, my daughter, and my dogs, we go on a walk every day for about an hour, hour and a half. It's lovely. We haven't had time to do that. Everybody had to go here, go there, do this, go there. But now that we have no place to go, that's one thing that's become a tradition in our family. Maybe your family's building some new traditions. I love it. We're all home for dinner every night together. That's sometimes that we always tried to do several nights a week, but now every night we can sit down and have dinner together. We don't have to talk about our day because we're already sharing our day, right? Yeah. But maybe some of you have parents that are out working. They're essential workers. Maybe you can ask them, so how was your day? What'd you do all day? Another book, Bodies in the Ash, Life and Death in Ancient Pompeii. Eruption, Volcanoes and the Science of Saving Lives. The Buried City of Pompeii. This one, she says, has beautiful illustrations and photographs. So if you like, and it tells about what the life was like for people that lived in Pompeii. So you might look at some of these books. I bet they're available on Amazon. The Secrets of Vesuvius. An archaeologist shares her experiences in doing some excavating. So I know I went through those quickly, but if you didn't catch it, just rewind the video. You can write those down or tell your parents about it if you want to maybe look for those books on Amazon or something. So that might be kind of fun thing to do. All right, well, we finished that book. So what I'll probably be doing is having some videos where we're just going through your ancient Rome book. I'll have you get your ancient Rome book out, and I'll go over some things that I've learned while I've researched some things, and then I might have you guys do some research on some things that might interest you. You can choose. I know we usually do our creative producers is based on ancient Rome. And I will get into that. I will let you guys do a project for creative producers at home if that is okay with your parents. There are particular guidelines that I like to give on that, so I think that that might work for you at your house, because I don't like you to buy anything. I like you to make everything. So, my family is, I think, getting ready to have dinner. So, I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Have a good evening.